The morning fog rolled thick across my front porch, much like it had that October day when Henry left for his usual hiking trip in the Greystone Ridge. I was pouring my morning tea, still 2 cups, even after all this time, when I saw the animal. It was a sleek, muscular creature with sharp eyes that gleamed like golden embers, holding something in its jaws. But what caught my attention wasn't the wildness of the bobcat, that alone was startling, it was what hung from its mouth. A faded green canvas jacket, frayed at the edges but unmistakable. My hands trembled as the teapot tilted, spilling steaming liquid onto the table. That jacket had been Henry's favorite. He'd worn it on the day he disappeared. I pushed open the screen door slowly, my breath catching as the bobcat stared at me, unflinching from the edge of the porch. Henry. I whispered his name like a prayer, the sound barely escaping my lips. The bobcat took a deliberate step forward, then another, its padded paws soundless on the wooden planks. It stopped inches from me, golden eyes unwavering. Then, it dropped the jacket. The damp fabric smelled of earth and pine. My fingers shook as I reached down, brushing the worn material. As I lifted it, something fluttered from the pocket, a brittle, folded scrap of paper. My breath hitched. I unfolded it carefully, the ink smudged but legible in places. My dear Maggie, if you're reading this. I'm in trouble. Lost the trail. Found a cave. Coordinates below. I love you. The rest was water-stained, unreadable. But one word stood out, cave. The bobcat didn't move. It just stared, ears twitching as if it understood. As if it was waiting. For years of silence. For years of emptiness. Now, Henry's jacket had returned to me, carried by a wild animal acting with eerie intent. My heart pounded as I looked at the woods, then back at the bobcat. It turned, glancing over its shoulder. A silent invitation. I had no choice. I had to follow. I rushed inside, grabbing my old hiking pack with shaking hands. Henry's jacket went in first, then a flashlight, water bottle, and, finally, the one thing I could never part with, his compass, still resting on the mantel after all these years. When I stepped back outside, the bobcat hadn't moved. It watched me, then turned, slipping toward the woods. I hesitated only a second before following. The trail was familiar at first, well-worn and packed from years of hiking. But the further we went, the less recognizable it became. Weeds and brambles swallowed the path, forcing me to push through, my breath ragged. The trees loomed taller, their dense canopy muting the sunlight. The bobcat moved effortlessly, gliding over fallen logs and weeding through tangled roots. It never hesitated, never strayed. It knew exactly where it was going. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the silence became. No birds, no rustling leaves, only the rhythmic crunch of my boots and the whisper of my own breath. A chill ran through me. A low growl stopped me in my tracks. The bobcat had frozen ahead, ears flattened, tail twitching. I followed its gaze. A single rock jutted from the ground, its surface covered in strange, weathered carvings. Not natural. Not random. Something left behind. The bobcat looked back at me. Then, as if confirming what I already knew, it moved past the rock and vanished between the trees. I swallowed hard, adjusting my pack. There was no turning back. I stepped over the rock and followed. The trail narrowed as the forest thickened. Vines twisted around gnarled branches, casting eerie shadows. I struggled to keep up, my legs aching, but the bobcat never slowed. Then, it stopped. Ahead, a jagged rock face jutted from the earth, half hidden by overgrown ivy. My breath caught. Nestled within the stone was a dark, narrow opening, a cave. The bobcat glanced at me once before slipping inside. I hesitated. The air was different here, heavier, charged. Still, I gripped my flashlight and followed. The cave swallowed me in damp darkness, the walls slicked beneath my fingertips. Strange markings covered the stone, faintly glowing under my light. Symbols. Warnings. The tunnel opened into a cavern, and my chest tightened at the sight before me. A makeshift campsite, abandoned but unmistakable. A tattered sleeping bag. Rusted food tins. A lantern, long out of fuel. My knees buckled as I spotted a notebook, its pages curled with time. I flipped it open, my pulse hammering. Day 3, found shelter. Supplies low. Day 12, strange mineral formations. Possible significance. Then, one final, chilling entry. Day 35, they are watching. I am not alone. My breath shuddered out. The words clawed at my mind. The bobcat let out a low growl, drawing my attention deeper into the cavern. My flashlight flickered across the far wall, illuminating something breathtaking, massive, glittering crystals embedded in the rock, pulsing with an eerie light. Something about them felt wrong. The bobcat's ears flattened. It turned toward a darker passage at the chamber's edge. It wanted me to keep going. Swallowing my fear, I stepped forward. The cavern pulsed with an eerie glow. The crystals, towering, jagged formations, sparkled like frozen lightning, their surfaces refracting my flashlight's beam in unnatural ways. I reached out, brushing my fingertips against one. Cold. Too cold. The sensation sent a shiver through me, an odd static humming beneath my skin. I had spent years studying minerals, but this was different. The structure, the way it absorbed light instead of reflecting it, nothing about it was normal. The bobcat growled low, pacing near the chamber's entrance. Its ears flattened, body tense. It sensed something I couldn't. I turned back to the notebook, flipping through Henry's final pages. His notes weren't just about survival. They were observations, calculations, warnings. Minerals contain unknown properties. Unnatural conductivity. Hearing whispers can't be real. They know I found something. They won't let me leave. I swallowed hard. Who were they? What had Henry discovered? A sudden shift in the air made my skin prickle. The bobcat's growl deepened. Something was near. Then, from the shadows beyond the crystals, a faint sound. Not wind. Not water. Footsteps. My breath caught. The bobcat moved first, slipping toward a narrow passage at the chamber's edge. It glanced back at me, eyes glowing in the dim light. A silent command. I had come too far to stop now. Clutching Henry's notebook, I followed. The passage narrowed, forcing me to duck. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows along the damp walls. The sound of rushing water grew louder. Then, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. An underground river snaked through the rock, its surface shimmering with reflected light from the bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. But my eyes locked onto something else, someone else. A frail figure slumped against the far wall. My breath hitched. Henry. He stirred, lifting his head. His face, thinner, older, was etched with exhaustion. But those eyes, those impossibly familiar eyes, met mine. Maggie? His voice cracked, raw with disbelief. I ran. The icy water bit into my skin as I waded through, stumbling in my desperation to reach him. The bobcat moved faster, leaping across the rocks with effortless grace. It nudged Henry, a low rumble vibrating from its chest. Tears blurred my vision as I collapsed beside him, pulling him into my arms. He was alive. You found me, he whispered. You never stopped calling me back, I choked out. His hands trembled as he clutched mine. The crystals, they wanted my research. When I refused, they left me here. His voice dropped lower. They never meant for me to leave. I swallowed, my grip tightening. You're leaving now. The bobcat let out a deep, resonant growl, staring toward the exit. It was time. I looped Henry's arm over my shoulder, forcing my legs to steady. He leaned on me, weak but determined. With one final glance at the glowing crystals, we followed the Bobcat into the darkness. The cave walls seemed to close in as we moved. Each step was a battle, Henry leaning heavily on me, his body weak from years of survival. The Bobcat led the way, its movements swift and deliberate. The moment we emerged into the open air, I gasped. The night sky stretched above us, the stars brilliant against the darkness. We were free. In the distance, voices. Flashlights bobbing through the trees. My heart surged with hope. I cupped my hands and shouted, "Over here!" A chorus of replies echoed back. Rescuers. They had heard me. Henry squeezed my hand. "I thought I'd never see the sky again," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Tears burned my eyes. "You're home now." The Bobcat stood at the tree line, watching. For a moment, I swore I saw something, understanding, even satisfaction, in its golden gaze. Then, just as silently as it had appeared, it turned and slipped into the shadows. Henry's grip tightened. "We owe that creature everything." I nodded, my gaze lingering on the darkened woods. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. As the rescuers reached us, I poured 2 cups of tea the next morning, just as I always had. But this time, Henry's hand covered mine. And for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't alone.